I came home from a long trip abroad, expecting the familiar sight of my sprawling property. Lush green fields, winding paths, and the centerpiece of my family's history, the ancient trees that had stood for over 200 years. But what greeted me instead was a nightmare. Stumps, freshly cut, raw stumps where towering oaks and maples once held stories of generations. My heart dropped, a sinking weight in my chest. How could anyone just destroy this? At first I thought it was a mistake, perhaps a rogue landscaping crew. Then I noticed the sign from the HOA, Homeowners Association. Notice, property improvements in progress. Improvements? They had destroyed my heritage under the guise of progress. And standing at the edge of my yard, clipboard in hand, was Karen. Yes, Karen. The quintessential HOA enforcer, smiling as if she'd done a favor. Your trees were in violation of community guidelines, she said, her tone disturbingly calm. We had no choice. I felt a surge of disbelief and anger. Community guidelines? These trees were older than the HOA itself. They had watched over generations of my family, endured storms, and marked every major life event on this land. And now they were gone. And all this, without my knowledge, without my consent. I tried to reason with her, to explain that these were not just trees. They were legacy, history, life. But Karen waved me off, citing rules, bylaws, and permits. My mind raced. There had to be something I could do. Then it hit me. Buried in my safe at home, gathering dust for decades, was the original land deed. Not a copy, not a digital scan, the original document, signed and notarized, proving ownership that predated the HOA itself. Suddenly the power shifted. I wasn't just an angry homeowner. I was the rightful guardian of this land. I realized at that moment that this wasn't just about the trees. This was about standing up to overreach, about history, legacy, and the audacity of people thinking they could erase it with a chainsaw. And Karen, she had no idea who she was messing with. But before I could act, there was a ticking clock. The HOA wasn't known for reversing decisions once they started, and I needed to move fast. Every second counted. Every strategy had to be precise. This is the story of how I confronted Karen and the HOA. The shocking legal twists, the community's reaction, and the lengths I had to go to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I couldn't believe the audacity of the HOA. They had cut down 200-year-old trees without a second thought, and now Karen stood there like nothing was wrong, as if history itself had no value. But I wasn't going to let it slide. I rushed inside and retrieved the original land deed, the heavy parchment crinkling in my hands like a weapon forged over centuries. I studied it carefully, line by line. This was more than a piece of paper. It was my proof that I owned the land free and clear, and the HOA had no jurisdiction over my property. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with the HOA board. I arrived early, holding the deed in my hand like a shield. Karen was already there, greeting members with her trademark smirk. As I entered the room, the air shifted. I could feel eyes turning toward me, murmurs spreading like wildfire. I calmly laid the deed on the table and said, "Before you continue, you need to understand who actually owns this land." Karen laughed nervously. "This deed doesn't change the rules. You need to comply with HOA regulations." I interrupted her, pointing to the date on the document. "This deed predates the HOA's charter by over a century. These trees were here before your association existed. You can't dictate terms on my family's property." The room went silent. Board members exchanged glances, their confidence shaken. I felt a surge of determination. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I pulled out historical maps, photographs, and letters that documented my family's presence on the land for generations. Every piece of evidence strengthened my position, turning what initially seemed like a hopeless battle into a case I could actually win. Karen tried every tactic, emotional appeals, veiled threats, even subtle intimidation, but nothing worked. I remained calm, precise, and unwavering. My history, my deed, and my evidence left no room for argument. And just when I thought the meeting might end in stalemate, one board member quietly whispered, "She's right. We overstepped." It was a small victory, but it was enough to spark hope. I realized this battle wouldn't just be fought in meetings. It would extend into legal notices, town records, and possibly a courtroom showdown. But the first step was taken. I had made the HOA acknowledge my ownership and the illegality of their actions. That night, I sat on the edge of my now bare yard, staring at the stumps and imagining the trees that once stood there. The fight wasn't over, but the tide was turning. And Karen, she still didn't know the full extent of what she had unleashed. After the initial showdown, I knew the HOA wouldn't back down quietly. Karen's smirk had disappeared, replaced with a tense rigidity that told me she realized this fight was far from over. Determined to uncover every hidden angle, I began digging into the HOA's records, permits, and internal communications. What I found shocked me. There were dozens of instances where the HOA had overstepped, bending or even ignoring rules to serve personal agendas. Emails revealed secret meetings where Karen and a few board members had discussed removing trees, expanding roads, and even reallocating property lines to benefit certain neighbors, all without informing homeowners. This wasn't just a bureaucratic oversight. It was a deliberate plan to rewrite the community to fit their vision. No matter who it hurt, I printed everything, organizing it into a binder. I called my HOA dossier. Each page was a testament to corruption, a roadmap showing the lengths they were willing to go to seize control. But I needed more than just evidence. I needed leverage, so I contacted a local historian and a real estate attorney who specialized in land disputes. They confirmed what I already knew. With my original deed, I had irrefutable legal authority over my property. The HOA had crossed a line, and they were now vulnerable to serious consequences. Meanwhile, Karen tried to maintain appearances. She visited neighbors, framing herself as a protector of the community, painting my fight as selfish and disruptive. But the truth couldn't stay hidden. When I began quietly sharing the evidence with a few key residents, whispers turned into confrontations. People began questioning Karen's motives. The very community she sought to control started to turn against her. I realized then that this battle wasn't just about trees. It was about exposing an entire network of manipulation. Every phone call, every secret meeting, every overreach became part of the story I could now tell. And the irony was delicious. Karen, who had tried to control my property, had unknowingly handed me the key to dismantling her influence. The final step was clear. I needed to confront her directly, in a way that left no room for denial. I drafted a letter detailing the evidence, my legal rights, and the potential consequences if the HOA refused to make amends. This was no longer just a fight for my family's legacy. It was a battle for justice, truth, and respect for history. As I prepared to deliver the letter, I felt a surge of determination. The moment of reckoning was near, and Karen had no idea how far I was willing to go. The next chapter would decide everything: the trees, the HOA, and the legacy of my family's land. The morning I delivered the letter, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. Karen was already at the HOA office, flanked by a few board members who looked uneasy. I walked in calmly, the dossier and the original deed in my hands, placing them squarely on the table. Silence fell instantly. I could see the flicker of panic in Karen's eyes, the first crack in her carefully constructed facade. "I've laid out everything," I said firmly. "The original deed proves ownership. Your emails show intentional overreach, and the community is aware. You have a choice. Reverse the destruction, acknowledge your errors, and make amends, or face legal action." I let my words linger. The room was tense, like a storm ready to break. Karen opened her mouth, trying to respond, but I continued, presenting photographic evidence of the trees before and after, along with historical documents proving their significance. Each piece of evidence strengthened my position, each page a reminder of what had been lost and what I was determined to restore. The board members shifted uncomfortably, realizing they were cornered. For the first time, Karen faltered. Her confident tone wavered as I calmly laid out potential legal consequences: restitution for the trees, fines for overreach, and possible personal liability for knowingly breaking HOA rules. She had underestimated me at every step, thinking I was just another homeowner to bully. But I wasn't. I was the rightful owner, armed with proof, history, and determination. Minutes felt like hours. Then, one by one, the board members began nodding. Quiet agreements were whispered, concessions made. Karen, realizing she had no escape, finally leaned back, her expression a mix of frustration and reluctant respect. They agreed to compensate for the destruction, implement protective measures for the remaining land, and formally acknowledge my ownership. It wasn't just a personal victory. It was a precedent for anyone in the community who might face similar overreach. Later, standing among the stumps of the fallen trees, I felt a mixture of sorrow and triumph. While nothing could replace the centuries-old giants that had been lost, justice had been served. The HOA had learned, the community had witnessed the importance of rightful ownership and history, and Karen's influence had been checked. This battle had tested patience, courage, and determination. But in the end, the deed, the evidence, and unwavering resolve had won. My family's legacy remained intact, stronger for the struggle, and the story of these trees would be told for generations, not just for what was lost, but for the fight to preserve what mattered most. And so, the chapter of destruction closed, replaced by one of justice, vigilance, and triumph. If you loved this story, hit that, comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more crazy HOA battles and jaw-dropping true stories.